On the freezing cold night of December 31st, 1998, something extraordinary happened. The finance ministers of 11 nations gathered in the glass towers of Frankfurt and the marble halls of Brussels. They were popping champagne. They were smiling for the cameras. They told the world they were creating a financial superpower that would rival America. But here's what they didn't tell you. They weren't building a cathedral of unity. They were building a debt prison, and they were locking themselves inside it. When the clock struck midnight and January 1st, 1999 arrived, 11 sovereign nations surrendered the oldest symbol of power a country can possess. They gave up their money. The French franc disappeared. The German mark evaporated. The Italian lira ceased to exist as an independent force. In their place came a ghost currency called the euro. The politicians called it progress. Economists called it inevitable. But if you looked at the balance sheet, if you understood what money actually does for a nation, you would have called it what it really was: financial suicide. Let me take you back to understand the scale of what was deleted that night. The German mark was one of the most respected currencies on earth. It was born from the ashes of hyperinflation in the 1920s, when German mothers burned banknotes to heat their homes because the paper was worth more than the cash. The Bundesbank, Germany's central bank, had spent 50 years building credibility. They fought inflation like a religion. The mark was hard as steel. When you held the mark, you held German discipline. The French franc had survived Napoleon, 2 world wars, and Charles de Gaulle. It was the currency of art and wine and Enlightenment philosophy. The Italian lira was ancient, tracing its lineage back to Charlemagne and the silver coins of Rome itself. These weren't just pieces of paper. They were the financial sovereignty of nations. They were shock absorbers. They were safety valves. They were the only tool a country has when reality comes knocking at the door. Here's what the champagne-sipping bureaucrats in Brussels didn't explain to the public. Money isn't just a medium of exchange. For a sovereign nation, currency is a weapon of survival. Let me show you how it works with a real example. Before 1999, Italy was a mess, beautiful chaos. The Italian government spent money like drunken sailors. They had massive debt. Their productivity was lower than Germany's. Their wages were too high. In a normal world, Italy would have gone bankrupt in the 1970s. But Italy had a secret weapon. It had the lira and the printing press. When Italian cars became too expensive for Germans to buy, when Italian exports started to collapse, the Bank of Italy would simply devalue the currency. Overnight, Italian goods would become 20% cheaper to the rest of the world. Exports would boom. Factories would stay open. The crisis would pass. It was a dirty trick. It was inflation by stealth, but it worked. It allowed Italy to remain an industrial powerhouse, despite political corruption and inefficiency. On January 1st, 1999, Italy voluntarily handed the keys to that printing press to a new landlord in Frankfurt. The European Central Bank was established with a single mandate: not to help Italy sell shoes, not to protect Spanish farmers. Its mandate was to fight inflation at all costs. The ECB was designed in the image of the German Bundesbank. Hard currency. No exceptions. No mercy. And here's where the trap was set. By joining the euro, countries like Italy, Spain, Greece, and Portugal surrendered their only defense mechanism against economic gravity. They became like a man who takes out a mortgage for $10 million, but hands control of his bank account to his neighbor. As long as the sun was shining, nobody noticed the chains. In fact, in the early years, the chains felt like silk. The first decade of the euro was a hallucination of prosperity. It was the bait in the trap. Let me show you how the trap worked with cold, hard numbers. Before the euro, if Greece wanted to borrow money from international banks, they had to pay brutal interest rates. Maybe 18%, maybe 20%. This was because investors knew the Greek drachma was a risky currency. They knew Greece might print money or devalue the debt away. That high interest rate acted like a speed limit on a mountain road. It prevented the Greek government from borrowing too much because it was too expensive to service. But on January 1st, 1999, something magical happened in the bond markets. Investors looked at Greece and they no longer saw the drachma. They saw the euro. They saw the signature of Germany. Suddenly, banks in New York and London started lending money to Greece at almost the same interest rate as Germany. Greek 10-year bond yields collapsed from 18% to just 3%. Think about that. It was free money. It was a credit card with no limit and no annual fee. The southern European nations went on a spending spree that makes the Roman emperors look frugal. The Greek government doubled the salaries of public sector workers. They allowed people to retire at 52 with full pensions. They bought French submarines and German tanks they didn't need. In Spain, they used a cheap euro credit to build the largest real estate bubble in human history. They poured concrete over the entire Mediterranean coastline. They built airports where no planes would ever land. They built highways to nowhere. In Ireland, they built ghost housing estates on the edges of Dublin. The voters loved it. The politicians were hailed as geniuses. They were delivering a first-world lifestyle on a third-world budget. Nobody asked where the money was coming from. Nobody asked what would happen when the bill came due. They believed the lie that the euro had magically transformed Greece into Germany. But while the South was partying, Germany was working. And this is the second layer of the trap. The euro was a disaster for the South, but it was a gold mine for German industrial dominance. Before the euro, every time the German economy did well, the mark would rise in value. A strong mark made BMW cars more expensive for foreigners. It was a natural brake on German exports. It gave other countries a chance to compete. But with the euro, that brake was cut. Germany was now tied to the weaker economies of southern Europe. The weakness of Italy and Greece acted like an anchor on the currency. The euro was weaker than the mark would have been on its own. This meant German exports were artificially cheap. Germany began to run enormous trade surpluses. In 2007 alone, Germany exported 100 billion euros more than it imported. The German machine was unstoppable. And here's the beautiful irony of the trap. German banks were lending money to Greek consumers so that Greek consumers could buy German cars. The money would leave Frankfurt, travel to Athens, and then immediately return to Frankfurt. Germany was vendor financing its own customers. It was a perfect closed loop. The German economy boomed while the industrial base of Italy and France was systematically destroyed. They couldn't compete with German efficiency, and they could no longer devalue their currency to compensate. The factories in Milan began to close. The textile mills in Portugal went silent. The olive growers in Spain were undercut by imports. The euro, which was supposed to bring convergence, was actually creating massive divergence. The North was getting richer and more efficient. The South was getting debt-ridden and uncompetitive. But the technocrats in Brussels refused to see it. They were blinded by ideology. They congratulated themselves on low inflation and exchange rate stability. They ignored the warnings of economists who said you cannot have a single currency without a single government. They ignored the lessons of the gold standard which had caused the Great Depression. They believed political will could overcome mathematics. Then came 2008. The global financial crisis exploded on Wall Street. The shock wave rolled across the Atlantic like a tsunami. At first, European leaders claimed they were immune. They said it was an Anglo-Saxon crisis caused by greedy American bankers. They were catastrophically wrong. The crisis ripped away the illusion and revealed the trap that had been set on January 1st, 1999. When the credit markets froze, investors suddenly woke up from their decade-long dream. They looked at the mountains of debt in Greece and Italy and Spain, and they realized a terrifying fact. There was no German guarantee. The German taxpayer had never agreed to pay Greek government salaries. The euro was not a unified sovereign currency. It was 19 separate national debts wearing a single mask. The sudden stop began. This is the nightmare scenario for any debtor nation. For 10 years, capital had flowed from north to south like a mighty river. Suddenly the river reversed direction. Banks stopped lending. They demanded their money back. But the money was gone. It had been spent on concrete and pensions and imported German cars. In a normal country with its own currency, this is the moment the safety valve pops. The currency crashes. The debt is inflated away. Exports boom. The economy takes a hit but survives. But Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal did not have their own currency anymore. They were trapped in a burning building with the exits welded shut from the outside. They could not print money to pay doctors and teachers. They could not devalue to boost exports. The only option left was something economists call internal devaluation. This is a sterile academic phrase for a brutal human reality. If you cannot lower the value of your currency, you must lower the value of your people. You must slash wages. You must fire workers. You must cut pensions. You must destroy the living standards of your population until they are so poor that they become competitive again. It is economic amputation without anesthetic. Let me show you what this looked like with specific numbers and dates. In late 2009, the newly elected Greek government revealed that the previous administration had been lying about the budget deficit. They said it wasn't 3% of GDP. It was actually 15%. The bond markets panicked. The interest rate on Greek 10-year debt skyrocketed from 3% to over 20% in a matter of months. Greece was insolvent. The country needed a bailout, or it would default. On January 1st, 1999, the Greek people had celebrated joining the club of rich nations. 11 years later, they found themselves occupied by a new kind of army. Not an army of soldiers, but an army of accountants. They were called the Troika. The European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. These three unelected institutions took control of the Greek economy. They dictated the laws. They rewrote the budget. They told the Greek parliament what to do. The Troika did not care about the suffering of the Greek people. Their priority was to save the euro system, or more accurately, Their priority was to save the French and German banks that had foolishly lent billions to Greece. If Greece defaulted, banks like BNP Paribas and Deutsche Bank would take catastrophic losses. They might collapse. The politicians in Berlin and Paris could not allow that, so they engineered a bailout. In May 2010, Greece received a loan package of 110 billion euros. But not a single cent of that money went to Greek hospitals or schools. It flowed straight through Athens and back to the creditors in Frankfurt and Paris. It was a money laundering operation designed to protect northern banks while pretending to help a southern nation. In exchange for this unpayable loan, the Troika demanded savage austerity. They demanded that the minimum wage be cut by 22%. They demanded that hospitals run out of medicine. They demanded that schools turn off heating in winter. The suicide rate in Greece increased by 35% between 2010 and 2012. People were searching for food in garbage bins in the shadow of the Acropolis. Youth unemployment hit 60%. An entire generation was destroyed. And through it all, the trap held firm. The Greek people voted in referendum after referendum against austerity. They elected the radical left Syriza party in 2015 on a platform of resistance. Their finance minister, Yanis Varoufakis, a leather jacket-wearing economist, tried to negotiate with logic and game theory. He explained that a bankrupt nation cannot repay its debts by shrinking its economy further. He argued that austerity was economically self-defeating. But he was talking to a wall. The German finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, was not interested in economics. He was interested in morality. In the German language, the word for debt is Schuld, which is the same word for guilt. Schäuble believed the Greeks had sinned by spending beyond their means. Now they had to do penance through suffering. The logic of the ledger was replaced by the logic of the pulpit. In July 2015, the Greek drama reached its final act. The Greek people voted in a national referendum to reject the bailout terms. 61% voted no. It was a resounding cry of defiance against the technocrats. But within 72 hours, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras capitulated completely. He signed a surrender document that was even harsher than the one the people had rejected. Why did he fold? Because the European Central Bank made it clear they were prepared to collapse the Greek banking system entirely. The ECB threatened to cut off emergency liquidity assistance to Greek banks. Without cash from the ECB, every ATM in Greece would go dark within days. Tsipras looked into the abyss and blinked. This was the moment the world saw the true face of the European Union. Democracy was optional. The rules of the euro were absolute. Sovereignty is solvency, and Greece had none. But let me show you the hidden mechanism that makes the trap truly inescapable. It's called the Target 2 payment system. This is a subject almost never discussed in mainstream media because it is too technical and too terrifying. Target 2 is the internal clearing system of the Eurozone. When a Greek citizen buys a German car, money has to flow from the Bank of Greece to the Bundesbank. In a normal monetary system, this transfer would be settled with gold or foreign currency reserves. But in the magical world of the euro, no settlement is required. The Greek central bank simply issues an IOU to the system. The German central bank accepts a claim against the system. For years, as the South imported German goods, and as capital fled from risky southern banks to safe German banks, these imbalances grew to unimaginable levels. By 2012, the Bundesbank had accumulated a Target 2 claim of over 700 billion euros against the rest of the Eurozone. By 2017, that number exceeded 1 trillion euros. Italy and Spain owed hundreds of billions through the system. It wasn't about saving Greece. If Greece had left and defaulted on its Target 2 liabilities, German taxpayers would have suddenly realized that hundreds of billions of euros of their national wealth were just imaginary entries on a computer screen in Frankfurt. The trap of January 1st, 1999 was designed to be irreversible. The architects had burned the bridges behind them. Let me take you to the moment the trap was temporarily disarmed. In the summer of 2012, the euro was on the verge of complete collapse. Italian and Spanish bond yields were spiraling out of control. Panic was spreading through the financial system. On July 26, 2012, Mario Draghi, the president of the European Central Bank, stood up in London and uttered 8 words that changed history. He said, "Within our mandate, the ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And believe me, it will be enough." Those 3 words, whatever it takes, were a nuclear weapon. Draghi was promising to print unlimited amounts of money to buy the bonds of struggling countries. He was effectively turning the ECB into a lender of last resort, something the Germans had always forbidden. The markets believed him. The panic subsided. Bond yields collapsed. The euro survived. But at what cost? The whatever-it-takes policy has turned the Eurozone into a zombie economy. To keep the South afloat, the ECB pushed interest rates to 0 and then below 0 into negative territory. They have printed over 4 trillion euros through quantitative easing programs. This has created massive asset bubbles in real estate and stock markets. It has enriched those who own assets while wages for working people remain stagnant. It has kept alive thousands of zombie companies that should have gone bankrupt, preventing the creative destruction that drives capitalism. And the fundamental structural problem has not been fixed. Italy has not grown in 20 years. Italian GDP per capita today is lower than it was in 1999 when they joined the euro. The industrial base continues to erode. The debt continues to grow. Italy's debt to GDP ratio now exceeds 135%. The trap of January 1st, 1999 is a slow strangulation. Not a sudden death, but a long, painful decline.